I think that if you're a woman who's trying to accomplish anything, you're going to, and it doesn't even have to be professionally. It can be athletically. It can be creatively. You're going to come up against the barriers of your gender at some point. It's inevitable. And so wouldn't you just rather know you walked through that fire, holding your head high and being who you are?
From Evia Events, it's Hillary Saves the World, a podcast about how people are using their positions, passions, and pocketbooks to change their worlds, one mission at a time. I'm Hillary Laney, and today's mission comes to you from Seattle, Washington. You will hear from guest Sara Sanford, co-founder and executive director of GEN, a nonprofit organization responsible for building the first standardized certification for gender equity in the U.S. workplace. Sara is an advocate for human equality who doesn't just talk about it, she acts on it every day with the work she does and behavior she exhibits. All right, Sara.
Hello.
Let's start at the beginning. So talk to me about your childhood. Where'd you grow up? What was your family like? What was it like to be young for you?
I don't know why, but like every time I get asked about my family, I think I just start laughing. Was born in Oakland, so am really kind of a California girl at heart. Only child, guilty of that. Only child, Jewish Leo. So it's a lot of noise, really. And I have a mom who's been a social worker and a counselor her whole life. So she's really lived in kind of the service of others. And that's been an amazing model to have. And then my dad, not to make a living, but for his passion, I would say he's a writer. He's a novelist. So, he was a technical writer for Boeing by day when we moved out here. But then he writes these gorgeous novels that are really like mainstream literary fiction. And so they were both cool examples to have, I think, of pursuing a dream. And I got to see that. And I think I didn't realize growing up what an impact that had on me. Just to pursue something, whether or not you knew it was going to work out. I think for both of them, it's like my mom would see these clients who were dealing with very difficult things, and then they leave and you never hear from them again. And it was just kind of this like, all right, well, I hope that person is doing better. I did everything for them I can. And my dad would spend years working on these books and put them out into the world, not knowing how they would be received. And so I think those are the things I remember seeing the most growing up. And then they both just really encouraged me to pursue projects and have interests and be myself.
Where'd you go to school?
So for high school or for college?
Either, whatever.
Okay.
Yeah, whatever you want to talk about. High school, then to college, maybe?
I went to Issaquah High School out here, so just outside Seattle, which is... Yeah, you may know it well. It reminds me of 10 Things I Hate About You a lot.
I know the movie well.
Yeah. It's, a wonderful, privileged place. And I think I'm grateful for the education that I got there. And it does not represent the rest of the world in some ways. And I was always itching to leave and to get out. And so I did. I went to school in Minnesota in this teeny college town called Northfield. And I think the town motto was... cows, colleges, and contentment. So it was a different experience than Oakland and Seattle for sure.
Yeah.
But it was a great experience. So I went to Carleton College and was an English major. And I say with specialties in dance and bartending. That's what I spent the rest of my time on. Like I went in thinking like, I'm going to do economics and Chinese. Like that would be useful and something I should do. And then just realized I wanted to read novels and poetry all the time and think about the humanities. And I didn't want to have a job on campus. I really kind of wanted to stay, I think, in touch with what people who weren't currently students were thinking about and what their lives were about. So bartending, it was a great way to make money. And it was a great chance to have conversations that weren't about school. I've always really liked working. So I didn't want to work on campus. And dance was just a great, fun way to, I think, get outside myself. And it's something that now later I'm so glad I spent time on. It's something that like after college I didn't do for 8 years, and then it came back into my life recently, really with starting this business a couple years ago, and I think has actually like saved me and saved my business a couple times.
What kind of dance do you do?
So in college I did hip hop.
Oh, fun.
Yeah. It was really fun, and I think like that was just always in my life for some reason. Like my grandma was a dancer professionally, and then my mom was for fun. And so it's this thing that we never formally told each other to do, but all the women kind of down my mom's line have always done. And so, yeah, I did hip hop then. And so I still do. I do a lot of hip hop and house and some modern now.
Cool.
And it gets me to get over myself a lot of the time. I think it's really easy when you're running a business to be super self-conscious all the time and be worried about how you come across and if you were on top of everything that day, and to go in a room and be forced to just do something silly looking in front of other people has carried over into the rest of my life so well. And it was the same with English. And it's funny. I know it's like your starting question, but it's something I'm super passionate about. I want the world to have more English majors. I know it's this thing that gets made fun of all the time, but in a lot of ways, I think I credit any success I've had to that it let me like look at the world and problems through the eyes of other characters, right? Through the eyes of other people. It taught me how to listen. And it taught me how to communicate. It's funny, you can have an MBA and you can have all the business knowledge in the world, but when you're stuck and you're completely down and you feel kind of hopeless, I don't think anyone turns to like chapter 3 on accrual counting versus, you turn to characters and you turn to heroes. And I mean, I know that times I've been really desperate in this business. It's like, I'm pulling out quotes from Atticus Finch in To Kill a Mockingbird about what courage looks like, and it's a quote that I keep coming back to about courage looks like knowing that you're licked before you've begun and doing it anyways. And I think that's really carried me through more than any other hard skill that I've learned.
Yeah, that's such a great way of looking at it. I'll be honest, I'm one of those people who's like, English major? What?
Yeah. No, I
but
get
hearing that perspective, I mean, it makes a lot of sense, truly.
Yeah. You're going to spend how much money on reading what now?
Right. So before, when you and I kind of chatted before this interview, you did tell me about your experiences abroad.
Yeah.
So do you want to talk to me a little bit, tell our listeners about, why you went there and kind of what you did during that time?
Sure. It was not my plan, which I guess it's funny. My boyfriend and I have this is going to be very dark, a running joke about what people's epitaphs would be, including my own. And I think that was not my plan would probably be my epitaph. It's been like the running theme. So yeah, it was like 2.5 months before college graduation, and I thought I knew what I was going to do. At the time, I thought I was going to do Teach for America, which would have been a terrible idea. And looking back on it, I'm glad I didn't do that. But I got a grant. So I got in on this grant-funded program to send 4 students to Costa Rica for 2 weeks over spring break, or like 10 days, to this macadamia farm that was out. So there's 7 provinces in Costa Rica, and this is in the Northwest province that's still called the Forgotten Province because it was super undeveloped. It's one of the few places left that hasn't been overrun by American and European tourism, and most people still don't speak English. It's great. So a lot of the culture has been preserved. So there was this macadamia farm that wanted to launch an ecotourism business, with the perspective really being, how can we do this in a way that preserves our culture, preserves the environment, puts the money back into our local town instead of the model that's taken over a lot of the country. And so 4 of us went out there to kind of pitch some ideas around agricultural tourism and medical tourism and tourism with students. And by the end of this, was just having some talks with the owners of this farm. I remember on their deck, and we're we're having some wine, and like fresh pineapple from the farm, and the owner, and so you're like looking out over this macadamia farm, right? And the sun setting, and the owner of the farm has given you like Chilean wine, and you rode the horse over to his house. And he's like, well, why don't you just come back here after graduation and do that and launch that business and run it, and that could be your job. And he was like, we can't pay you anything, but we can give you a house and a horse and a dirt bike. And I was like, yeah, that sounds great. Fine. And I was like, well, how do you eat? And he kind of like gestured around like, you idiot, you live on a farm. Because it was like there was a tropical fruit orchard and everyone just shared basically. So I ended up changing my plans super last minute and went out there and did have a house and a horse and a dirt bike. And got to launch and run this bizarre business that was agricultural tourism. I have no background in agriculture. I don't know what the hell I was doing there. And I didn't speak Spanish at the time. I had tried in college, and I'm not that great at learning languages in a classroom environment. So I went there and I just cried for the first 3 months until like something clicked, and all of a sudden I could speak Spanish. And got to run this beautiful program, and it's still there 10 years later. They've really built it out and expanded. Yeah, it was really fun.
That's amazing.
It was super fun.
How long were you down there for?
I was there for a little over a year.
Okay. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Do you look back and, are there any desires to go back and kind of check it out? And
I mean, especially now, man. It doesn't look half bad a lot of the time.
Yeah.
I mean, I've revisited. And actually, after leaving there, I started a small nonprofit to send money back for educational efforts, because I saw that in the rural areas, so it's the most literate country in Central America. They've also had no army since 1949, so all their money goes into education, which is fantastic.
But I was going to say, imagine that.
Yeah, it's incredible. So they have, entirely hydroelectric energy all over the country. Wow. They have a very educated population. But in this area, a lot of teachers didn't get out there because you have issues like, the one wooden bridge washed out. So the teachers couldn't make it in to teach. So, I mean, I've gone back to visit a couple times, but I've definitely, thought about in the future having a home out there. It wouldn't be a bad place to move.
I'll come visit.
They figured a lot of things out.
We've kind of talked about schooling and your background. Let's dive into the work stuff.
Yeah.
So after this experience down in Central America, you got into the financial industry, right?
Kind of.
Ultimately, I don't know, kind of walk me through your experience getting into the professional world and how you ended up with Jen, basically.
Yeah, that's a weird, long story. So I came back to Seattle for grad school and got a master's in public policy and international development at the UW, thinking at the time that I really, I had started this nonprofit around education in Costa Rica, but I didn't know how to run it. I didn't know what I was doing. So I think my thought at the time was, I'll go to grad school and then I'll really know how to run this thing. And going to grad school, and especially looking a lot at public-private partnerships and how businesses can work with nonprofits to make a difference, changed my perspective on what impact looks like. And, I know it sounds kind of obvious, we all want impact, but I think there is this traditional model in the nonprofit world that's very service oriented, that's very let's raise money for something that we see as a cause, that there's this charity based version of nonprofit change, which is really problematic because it usually doesn't address the systemic issues behind why there's a problem in the first place. So you end up with this cycle that never fully fixes any problems. It just makes a little dent. But if the root of the problem is never addressed, it's not going to be changed for the long term. So after grad school, I was working for the Edgar Martinez Foundation for a while, which was a fantastic organization focused on building racial equity in Washington's K through 12 schools, because we actually had the greatest gap between percentage of students that are people of color and percentage of teachers that are people of color. And so we focused on the systemic issues around that, on funding and supporting teachers of color, in the schools and then supporting them once they're there, giving them support networks. So I had been doing that for a while, and it's funny, it really was my dad who encouraged me to take some time in the corporate sector. And I hadn't before, and I was a little skeptical of it. And I think I thought, I struggle with the idea of selling out, to be completely honest. I think I felt this sense of like, I needed to stay in the nonprofit arena to be real about it. And I think I felt this sense that if I somehow wasn't sacrificing myself via a salary, that it wasn't authentic. And really, it's like, you not living off of much doesn't actually help anyone else. I needed to get that through my head, honestly, that was just ego, that was just self-image, and that was just self-perception. And, I think I thought that within the system, I could have a bigger impact. And so, yeah, I ended up in finance. So first locally at a finance company. And I told this story when I spoke at Ignite. From the first moment, I look back on this version of younger me and kind of shake my head and grimace a little bit. But it was my first corporate interview I had ever had. And the staffing agency told me I would only be meeting with a woman who would potentially be my boss. And so I go in to meet with her. And during the interview, this like tall, broad-shouldered man enters the room and doesn't introduce himself, doesn't really tell me who he is, and asks to steal me for a second. And he pulls me into what is like the equivalent of a broom closet. And he asks me if I have plans to have kids anytime soon. And at the time I was 26. I just stuttered out, no, sir. And he said, good, because the last thing we need around here is another mother.
Oh my gosh.
And so, I said nothing. And I know at the time, I was just like, can he ask me that? I don't know if he can ask me that. I didn't really know what my rights were. And I didn't know what normal was, right? And I think when you're really starting your career as a woman, you don't want to make waves. You don't know if you're being crazy. You get kind of gaslighted by the environment. And so I said nothing, and I got the job. And there was only one mother in that office when he said that, and she was my boss. And that was my introduction to the financial world. And in a lot of ways, I'll say, it represented itself in different ways, but that theme was constant throughout this male-dominated environment. And so I kind of put it on that one institution at the time because I didn't know any better. But then we got bought by another finance company, and I ended up working for them. And it was the same. And I can't really blame it on the institutions, because it was like, then I would go to conferences where there were multiple businesses. And even if I was speaking, I would get asked whose assistant I was, and I would get asked whose wife I was. And I'm still, that still happens. And now I'm used to it. And yeah, so I was in the finance world for a few years, about 5 years. And I was given the what seemed like a great opportunity at both of these institutions to launch and manage their programs to recruit and retain women and minorities as professionals in this industry where they're really underrepresented. And so I was really excited about that at the time. But what I saw was that these organizations would go to the point of recruiting them, but we still hadn't fixed our problems in-house. So I knew that we were going to recruit these women, tell them it was a great place to work, tell them that we had their backs, and they would show up to a place where they would be doubted if they were mothers and not seen as committed, even though the fathers weren't doubted in the same way. They would be cut off in meetings. Their ideas wouldn't be listened to. They wouldn't be promoted on the same timelines. They would be excluded from growth areas in the company. And that was wearing on me over time. And I think I underestimated the toll it was taking, because there was just a lot of smiling through it and a lot of like, let's try harder. Let's jump over here. Let's make a different argument for doing things a different way. I think it had reached a breaking point. And then it was around, Yeah, it was towards the end of 2016. So we all know what happened towards the end of 2016.
Very familiar.
Yeah.
With that.
And so, yeah, it was, I think a lot of things were coming to a head. I don't know, for a lot of women. I think whether or not Hillary won, I think we saw how that election played out. We saw how this immensely qualified, educated, experienced woman who had like walked the double bind tightropes had been treated throughout that election.
Yeah.
At the time, I had dealt with, being treated either as, I saw that I could either be seen as smart but too aggressive, or I could be seen as calm but not taken seriously within the finance industry. And it's really hard to move forward when you're constantly stuck between those two. And so there was finally an event that happened at a conference that I was, working for my employer at the time. And we had a lot of guests in. Ironically, I had been hired to run this program that was based around ideas of equality. And there was someone at this event who was a large producer for our company at the time who said something blatantly bigoted, blatantly discriminatory. I objected to it and left the room. 2 days later, I didn't have a job. No one would say that was why I didn't have a job anymore. Mm-hmm. And I remember too, I remember calling my dad from the O'Hare airport and telling him, I said this thing, I think I'm going to lose my job. And him being like, they're not going to fire you for that. But yeah, bright and early on a Monday morning. I remember very clearly getting the call and kind of being fine with it.
I was going to say, what was your reaction at the time? Because, it was sort of, like you said, there was sort of this buildup, right, over time. So
Yeah, there, I think I wasn't that. I think at the time I was glad it had happened to me. I think I felt like I couldn't walk, probably. Like that would have been ungrateful, that there were still changes that I wanted to see made. And in a way, it was scary because I didn't know what was next.
Right.
I had no fallback plan at the time, but it wasn't a place I was going to miss. And it was funny. One of my friends came over that morning. I called her and I was like, hey, I just got canned. And so she came over with breakfast sandwiches, I remember, and mimosas, because I had no job to go to that day. So why not? And she just kind of like walked in laughing, and I was like, you asshole. And she was like, we knew that was going to happen. Come on. Like it was just an issue of when. Yeah. And so, I took some time. And the thing is, like, that was in October. In November, the election happened. My best childhood friend and I at the time had actually gone out to Utah to go climbing during the election. And we had this take of like, we were going to be down by some hot springs out of reception. We weren't even going to listen. We were going to wake up the next day and, find out if the world had blown up or if we had our first female president. And it was like, we couldn't resist wanting to see it happen. And so at the time we, had a van we had rented, booked it like 5 hours into Salt Lake City into a pub where we could, watch a TV. The night played out and we just, I remember we couldn't believe it. And
I still can't believe it.
Yeah, no, some amount of shock. And I remember like we drove around a lot trying to find somewhere to park the van to sleep for the night. And of course it was stupid because we didn't sleep because nobody slept. And I just remember like I fell asleep for an hour, I think, and then remember waking up to my friend Mackenzie being like, it's real, dude. And I came back and I remember opening my computer to try to apply for a job and just couldn't get myself to do it. It was just, the dam had kind of broken at that point. That one event on top of the other, I didn't see a way of going back. And fortunately, around the same time, had kind of gotten this huge group of amazing, accomplished, intelligent women around me, some of whom were data analysts. And it was really just one night over drinks that like the question got asked out loud, is there a way for women to know what's a good place for them to work? Is there just like a stamp that lets us know this is an equity-centered employer? And we sat there for a second, and it was funny. These two women are British, And so, they're banging around their computers and they look up and they're just like, well, bloody hell. Like, I think we've got it. I think that's it. I think we've got to do it. And we all looked at each other like, oh no. Like,
no going back now.
Yeah, we've got to do it. And unfortunately, we're all really equipped to actually do this. So we have no excuse. I'm on unemployment, so why not? And Jen really came out of that.
That's fantastic. I love the story. I hate what you had to go through with all of that, but where it led you and what you've done with it is amazing.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
So you've sort of addressed some of this a little bit in what you've talked about, but one of my questions here is around the challenges that women, I think in general, especially in these male-dominated industries that we've touched on. Mm-hmm. So you were in the financial industry. You're now in the STEM industry, really, with, the data analytics and all this stuff that you're focused on and the scientific approach that you're taking. What sort of obstacles have you faced that you feel, I guess, maybe have challenged you or made you kind of second guess what, being in these industries? Or because it's just interesting, like, despite some of these instances that you've brought up already, you've still kind of stayed in this space that's challenging, right? Right, along with that.
Yeah.
So I don't know, maybe tap into that a little bit more.
So why have I stayed in it?
Yeah. I mean, how are you able to kind of overcome those challenges and just kind of stick with it and power through?
I mean, I think the biggest challenge, at least for me, and in a lot of ways, this is an immensely privileged challenge to have. But I think the biggest challenge is just not being taken seriously. And I think it's the one I hear from women most often, no matter what industry they're in, but especially if they are in a male-dominated industry. And it's weird because it's not as blatantly offensive as like, I was sexually harassed, I was sexually assaulted. And it's funny, it's like in finance, I was sexually harassed, but somehow those aren't the moments that made me doubt myself. And it's gross and awful, but at least I just get to say that guy's a gross jerk.
Yeah.
But the moments of not being heard, the moments of not being taken seriously, I think are the most vicious in this really visceral way, because they echo in your head years later. They make you doubt yourself. And I realize they make you doubt yourself if that's what you choose. And I think for me, I've just always been eager to prove those voices wrong. Maybe it's coming from a family of people who in some ways prove other people wrong. It's funny. It's like my grandma in a lot of ways was this amazing, strong woman who like came from this, line of Holocaust survivors and had to go through a lot of challenges. But despite that, my mom's brothers were expected to go to college, but my mom wasn't. Mm-hmm. And not only did she go to college, she then got a master's degree and she had her own private practice for decades. And it was her own kind of quiet way of being brave, I think, and bucking the system. And it's not, a form of bravery that like wears a protest shirt or is setting shit on fire, but it was a really tough thing to do. And so I think I saw that and I carry that with me. And honestly, I think it's more, and this is something I think of for other women too, I think of doing it on behalf of other women. And I think that makes it easier to be stronger a lot of the time, that I see so many other women whom I know are qualified and I know are smart and I know are very capable, and their environments have made them doubt themselves. And it makes me furious. It makes me furious on their behalf. It makes me furious for the organizations that are missing out on their talent, for the fact that society is missing out on their talent and their contributions. So a lot of the times when I don't want to keep going, I think of them. I think of other, just the change has really been made by other people who are willing to be the greater fool. I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of the greater fool. Anyone who watches The Newsroom probably is. Olivia Munn's character is definitely my favorite on that show, and they have this great episode called The Greater Fool, in which she talks about, and I think this is a quality that especially women end up needing to have in leadership. Anyone who tries to do anything new or disruptive, anything anything called crazy, basically. People will need to have the quality of being the greater fool, in which it's technically an economic term where the greater fool is a patsy. It's the person that the rest of us need to profit. So the greater fool is the person who's willing to like buy long and sell short. They're who we toss the hot potato to. We die for their seat when the music stops. But really our country was made by greater fools is kind of the great line from the newsroom. And anything great that's ever been accomplished has been done by someone who was willing to be that greater fool, who's like, yep, no, this definitely may not work out, but I want to see it through to the end and see if it does. So fortunately, there are examples of people out there who have done it, and they keep me going as well.
What about failure?
So fun.
I know.
No, it's good.
I don't know. What's your experience with failure? What do you think about it when I say that word? As leaders of organizations, it's like, you know, it can go either way.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm like, how do you feel when you ask me that? Oh, it's such a brat, and it's so necessary. It's like, I think of it the same as adolescence. It's like this thing that you have to go through to get better. Yeah, it's definitely something I faced. I just think we need to be less afraid of it, which is such a cliche answer. But we just don't get better without it. And we don't get better without trying. And it's interesting. I think a lot of people who are in STEM spaces, whether it's in data or tech, in some ways I envy those who are in the like straight for profit tech space, because they have the mindset of this fail fast mindset, right? Of just try it out, try it out, try it out. And we're technically a nonprofit. Jen is a nonprofit. And there's not the same mentality in the nonprofit world. It's really restrictive, can keep the sector from growing. So unfortunately, the donor mindset doesn't work in the same way as the investor mindset. Where, you know, for nonprofits, we talk about like the Thanksgiving turkey model, where people give based on being able to see a really quantifiable output. So they want to know my $100 bought 10 turkeys for 10 people. They don't want to spend money as often on R&D, on paying nonprofit workers competitive salaries, for example. So we're a little more restricted in terms of being able to take risks and fail. And I think we're really afraid to fail because we're afraid to lose our donors. We have to show low overhead, which is a criminal thing to do to imagination. It's a criminal thing to do to exploration and growth. So, you know, it's funny when I think of failure, I immediately think of like the nonprofit funding complex and that we're not allowed to fail. And it's this weird thing that in some ways also chimes with being female in a lot of ways, you know, where I think we have a lot of pressure to be perfect. And it keeps us from taking chances because we don't want to look ugly. We don't want to look stupid. We know that in a lot of ways we're representing all women. So if we fail, people don't say she doesn't have what it takes. They say women don't have what it takes. And that's terrifying. But I think in some ways we have to be able to take that risk. So I would just, in addition to encouraging leaders to fail, I also would encourage funders, this is my plug, to fund failure. Absolutely fund failure.
That's a good way to put it. I like that.
Yeah, because otherwise you're never going to fund change without funding failure first. And it's fine. Failure is just another step that means that we're closer to finding the right answer. That's all. Like I tell women in negotiation workshops, if you don't hear the word no, you have not asked for enough. You can always back off. You can always go back. But if you haven't heard the word no in a conversation, you haven't taken a big enough risk, you're not actually moving forward.
Yeah, it's so true. I love that. As a woman in the industry that you're in now, and if you want to speak to work that you've done before, that's fine too. But have you ever felt like you have an advantage or a disadvantage being a woman doing this type of work?
Yes, to both. I mean, obviously there's the disadvantage that, you know, I just spoke of in terms of not being taken as seriously. I think in a lot of ways we're taught to accommodate, to make space for others. There's you know, been fascinating studies about If a woman walks down a sidewalk, and doesn't move, how many men she'll run into that day because we are the ones who will step to the side. We become, over time, very conscious of how we're seen and how others see us, how desirable we are, how likable we are, what we've been given permission to do. And the weird strength that comes out of that is that we're also really good at reading people's needs and at reading people's comfort levels and their wants. I think being in a space that is really centered around consulting, it's something that's helped, that you're able to read people's body language, able to listen to their tone and see what's really keeping them up at night and see what excites them, then run with that. And so in some ways, I think that's come out of the survival techniques we've honed as women over the course of our life.
I love the way you tap into kind of the history of, where we come from. And even if you look even further back than that, like I even just think about my grandmother and how she was so proper and she felt this need. She was, and she felt this need to just always look and act a certain way. And there were certain words that none of us could say around her because it was, offensive, and they weren't the type of words that you would actually get offended by. Right. And, but very much the way you just described that. I mean, and that's just my grandmother, right? I mean, she grew up in the 40s, and I mean, that's not even further back than that. It's just so ingrained in us.
It is, and it's like, and you saw it. Mm-hmm. That's the thing, and I think we don't maybe get the same direct teachings around that our grandparents did. But it still passes down from generation to generation. We see it as examples.
Absolutely.
and mimic.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what about work-life balance for you? I can empathize running a business myself. I know how demanding that is. There's been stages in my career where it's been like a 24-hour-a-day type thing, and I just never shut it off. I've kind of learned over the years that that's not really sustainable.
Yeah.
Have you learned that? What's your, and maybe you don't call it balance. Maybe it's just kind of the juggling act or whatever, but how do you feel, do you live in that at all right now? Or do you feel like it's just kind of all consuming?
It's all consuming until it's not. So I realized that the striving for balance was actually really stressing me out. And that I felt this weird kind of guilt and inadequacy that I hadn't spent, proportionate amounts of time on reaching out to my personal connections and then doing the right amount of yoga and the right amount of meditation and cutting up my vegetables for the week and like Instagramming, the sunset that I saw that night while I was taking 6 minutes for myself and eating 10 almonds. Like I realized, I don't know, I had read so much advice about it and I tried to follow it. And in some ways it felt disingenuine and it just made me feel more not good enough somehow at the end of the day. And so I did read this thing lately that I really liked that was more that I think I live by. That was this idea of seasons and kind of living in seasons. And I think that's something I'm more comfortable with. That sometimes my work is completely all-consuming, and I'm actually okay with it. And I think that when I say that, other people hear workaholic, like they hear a disaster, but I'm in a place that's really fortunate where I love my work. Mm-hmm. My work is, is a big part of who I am. It comes from a personal space and something I care deeply about. So to me, it just means that I'm engaged and it's something that I happen to make a living out of, that I've managed to make a living out of. And there are other times where I'm completely done with it. If someone asks me one thing in the context of as a woman or as a feminist, like I'm going to lose my mind. I'm not going to answer the question. It's not what I want to think about. And so I think I more tend to get really deeply focused in one area for long periods of time. And then when I'm done with it, I'm done. And I go and I take a weekend, doing something completely different in a way. I think otherwise I realized I just never feel like I'm getting out of it at all. It's just always there as this low level undercurrent. So I think I've stopped striving for balance in some ways. I have some things that are my mainstays that I insist on, and maybe that's my form of balance, where I make sure, I get a lot of exercise. I get teased about it a bit. That's definitely where a lot of my stress goes. A lot of my rage goes. Are you familiar with Natasha Lyonne from Russian Doll and Orange is the New Black?
Yes,
Oh my
I
gosh,
do
she's
know
hilarious.
her. Yeah, she's great.
She's so I'm obsessed with her interviews. Like, I've just been watching her interviews all the time. And she talks about, so I've been really embarrassed to admit that I go to spin class and I love spin class. I think it's like that Issaquah part of me that I don't want to admit is in me. And I remember I went once because I had a free class and I was like, oh no, I really like this. So Natasha Lyonne talks about going to spin class too, and how it's like she also is embarrassed of it, and she's like, I love that it's in the dark. I love that no one can see me. I love that I can be like kind of silently rage screaming in the background. And the classes are always taught by like someone who's a combination of a serial killer and like an inspirational speaker somehow, and that vibe really works for me for getting the stress out. And so yeah, usually when like, I don't know, some new misogynist crud nugget of a thing gets said to me, I'm like, cool, I'm gonna bike about you later. That's fine. So that's probably the closest to balance I have.
That's great. And you dance too,
and I
right?
dance.
You mentioned.
Yes. That there was a point with this business about a year and a half ago that was a low point in which thought we were going to close it down, thought I was have to go find a job.
So glad you didn't.
Me too. Thank you. It was just, yeah, it was one of those make or break points, in which I really leaned on the people around me. And the other thing I did was go back to dance. And I hadn't been back for 8 years. And went into a dance studio because I just didn't know what else to do. It was like I couldn't think about work. I couldn't reason a way out. I couldn't look at a spreadsheet. And I just needed to move. And I think remembering that there was like one thing that I could do. And also that was just for me, honestly. That oddly enough, it was the people in my life and dance that pulled me out.
So I know, obviously, given what you're doing with your organization, giving back to the community and making an impact and a difference beyond just bringing a paycheck home is important to you. So outside of Jen, are there other organizations or other things that you're doing in the community that you feel passionately about? Or
So I wish I was giving more time to this. And, if others are looking for something to volunteer their time or their funds to, or just to attend, Future for Us is a fantastic organization. They are locally founded by two amazing women named Sage and Aparna. And they really focus on resources for women of color in the workplace. And, it's something at Jen that we try to focus on, that we've built into the model of our certification, and that we work with business leaders on, and understanding that the lived experiences of women of color are different than white women, that, they face more struggles and a different set of struggles. So Future for Us, though, really focuses on giving direct resources and a community to women of color in Seattle, and nationally, but they're based here. But I went to their launch event, and it was one of these good wake up moments of remembering how privileged we are in this space, because it was this room full of women of color. And I remember overhearing them saying, oh God, it's such a relief. I get to be myself for one night. I get to look how I want to for one night. I get to sound how I want to for one night. And I think especially in prosperous growing cities like Seattle, that's really difficult to find. And Aparna told this story. She's one of the co-founders at the beginning, about how she was, I believe, with her mother, and I hope I'm not telling the story wrong, They were walking somewhere. A woman came up to them and asked how much it would be for their nannying services for like no reason. There was no context other than the color of her skin. I mean, you're talking about someone with a graduate degree who's a professional. Not that that's an okay thing to say to anyone, but it's a whole new level of not being taken seriously, having things proactively assumed about you and said to you. So I think they're really providing something that I haven't seen from other organizations. And I hope more businesses are going to bring them in and work with them to understand how to, not just recruit, but support and promote and provide a real sense of belonging to women of color here.
So there are going to be quite a few young women, as we've talked about, hopefully listening to this podcast and feeling inspired and motivated. So, if they were in this room with us right now, let's say we had a couple of them here, and as we were having this conversation, you had the opportunity just to turn to one of them and give them some advice on, imagine they're potentially in high school, junior high, they're kind of starting to think about the future and what they want to do. They've witnessed all the craziness that's gone on in the media and they're seeing what's happening, the Me Too movement. I'm really trying, hopefully with this podcast series, to bring out, yes, there are challenges, but you can do it. Like, it's not like we're doing it, right? And we're here having a great conversation. And what advice would you give? What would you tell them? What are, I don't know. Words of wisdom, potentially.
So one of them is going to sound really big and inspiring, and one of them is going to sound more mundane. But in some ways, I think has been more important for me in my experience. So the first one is just to be bold and stay bold. I've gotten a lot of feedback, we'll call it. I think I especially did through my 20s. I still get it now. I just don't listen to it as much. That I'm too loud, that I'm too intense, that I'm too much. A lot of things starting with two. And I did try to soften that for a while. I don't think I can say I softened it successfully.
Thank goodness. I am so grateful that you didn't.
Where I would be like,
bring it on.
Right? I would ask people, I'd be like, how was that? Was that not as loud? And they would be like, no, Sarah, you're just whisper yelling. It's just as disruptive.
Whisper yelling. Good.
Because the thing is, and it's funny, it's one of the lesser known, I think they're really famous like Helen Keller quotes out there in the world, but this is a lesser known one where she says you can be fearful or you can be bold. Danger comes for the fearful just as often as it comes for the bold. So the idea is, wouldn't you rather have just been yourself meanwhile? And I think what I learned over time, it was like I kept trying to contort myself into these weird shapes of what I thought I should be, and it didn't get me anywhere. It probably got people mad at me less often. But the problem is that it might have gotten me socially accepted, but it was socially accepted as someone who was not putting her ideas out there, who was not working on the kinds of projects she wanted to be working on. And so what? It was like I was socially accepted, but because I wasn't getting what I wanted. And eventually, I really do believe that you'll find your people and you'll find environments where you thrive. I mean, Evie has been a great example of that, honestly. Like, I felt at the moment that I met Gay, I felt at the moment that I walked in here that people could be themselves. And they really did have a home here. And I mean, you've done an incredible job with that, and it allows people to really flourish. And so I think that if you're a woman who's trying to accomplish anything, you're going to, and it doesn't even have to be professionally. It can be athletically. It can be creatively. You're going to come up against the barriers of your gender at some point. It's inevitable. And so wouldn't you just rather know you walked through that fire holding your head high and being who you are? Because it's going to suck either way.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
it might as well suck being who you are. Yeah. It's just way easier. You're going to have the people around you like that, you know, then when you do get fired, bring over a breakfast sandwich and laugh at you.
And mimosas.
Right? they know you. They know your needs.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
important. And the other thing I would say, and this is a Virginia Woolf quote going back to English major days, is get a room of your own when you become old enough in life to do that. I think one of the things I've insisted on and that I've been really grateful to have is always having a space to myself. I didn't realize how much time I think people think of me as an extrovert. It's really just that I'm selectively social. But I've always insisted on having a place to myself, or if I'm living with someone, a room to myself. So even right now, it's like, you know, my boyfriend and I are moving in together in a couple days. You know, he brought it up actually and emphasized it, where he was like, you're gonna, wherever we move to has to have a room with a door that closes for you. You have to have that space. I've seen how important that is for you. And it's true. Cool. It's really important. I appreciate that he saw that. Yeah. And it's funny. It's something that people pointed out to me over time. They were like, Sarah, you spend a lot of time alone. And the thing is, I think men spend a lot of time alone too. Mm-hmm. Just no one says it to them. And we have more social expectations on us. People rely on us a lot more for emotional labor. You know, we get a ton of text messages. We get a lot of questions asking what we think about something, you know, usually people's dilemmas in their life. It's a lot of unpaid emotional labor. And it's not likable, I think, as women to say no to that, to say that we're just not available. But it's been essential to getting anything done. So I would say be bold and get a room of your own. Very important.
That's great. Where were you when I was younger?
I was in my room.
Yeah. I could have used that advice. So what's next for you? I mean, gosh, you've already done so much, but I'm curious, like, do you have something on the horizon that's kind of your next big thing? It doesn't have to be professional. It could be anything.
I mean, I think the next big thing for Jen, we're doing and I don't mean for this to be a plug, it just is where my energy is going.
Plug away.
We're doing a 20 by 2020 campaign. So we are looking to certify the first 20 businesses by the year 2020. And, you know, we've learned from looking at other certification models that are out there that getting your first chunk is the hardest because it's scary. A lot of businesses are scared. You know, we're not a pay to play. We're not here to just to give anyone a marketing bump, to be honest. We hope that happens because we do know that shifts culture. But we have real standards and criteria behind what we do. I don't think any of them are unreasonable. They're things that I hope we would have embraced as a society right now, such as paid leave, such as gender blind application processes. So it's nothing that we see as insane, but businesses have to have these to get Gen certified. You know, it's been a challenge. D&I, diversity and inclusion, has become a crowded space over the last few years. It has become very trendy. And so I think a lot of people are looking to take a bite out of it and get some form of stamp and something that says we care about this. You know, I don't want to speak out against anyone else who's working in this space because there's plenty of work to be done by all of us. But there are a lot of lists you can get on right now that don't have real criteria behind them. In which the bar is not as high, in which you can just contribute money to something. And congrats, you're on a signatories list for women in business. And so that has been the challenge for us, that is in some ways our competition. It's been suggested to us that we lower our standard at times. It's something that we've discussed and we won't be doing.
Good.
I think women have been asked to settle in many ways in their life for a long time. I continue on kind of a meta level to find it really frustrating when we're asked to lower our bar. You know, I think of the young woman that you want to hear at this podcast. There are high schoolers that I'm mentoring currently that are already doing incredible things. You know, I think of one of them, this woman is like the head of her high school's Refugee Alliance Club and then the head of their Model UN.
Wow.
And she's 16. She's working with her city's Chamber of Commerce to pilot affordable transportation options for low-income workers.
Amazing.
And she's told me, she's like, we know that businesses are biased. She said to me, I'm worried about what happens to all of this hard work. Even if I get into a good college, if I just end up in a biased business, it's like it all will have gone to waste. Are we going to ask her to lower her standard? Is that something that we want to do? You know, we founded Jen so that she would not have to lower her standard. We are looking for the first 20 businesses that are authentic about their commitment to equity, that are willing to take a chance and look at themselves and see where they have an area to improve, and that are really going beyond lip service to be there for women who have put in the work for a long time and that are more than enough already.
It's incredible. It's awesome. I'm thrilled to be part of this experience. I'm just, to throw that out there that Evia is participating and getting certified. We're in the midst of it right now. And it's interesting because when I think about what the work that you're doing, to me, I'm like, 20 businesses, that shouldn't be a problem, right? I would imagine that everyone's just pounding down your doors to get this and to truly want to take a look at themselves and make sure that they are doing what they need to be doing as a business to support these things. Because I would say that, especially as of late in the media, which I tend to turn that dial down quite often, but when you do hear things, you do get these stories of these businesses, large tech companies. I mean, you look at this stuff and you think, God, they're doing great things. But I think to your point, and it's not to say that they aren't. I mean, they definitely are. But there is this deeper layer. Mm-hmm. And what I've learned, even just in the small amount that I've been exposed to and partaking in this experience, is that it's not just about what's on paper. It's about how that shows up in the reviews or, conversations in the office, or how, management style. Like, it's not just, okay, do we have 50 women and 50 men and are they all getting paid equally? Yeah. Yes, that's definitely part of the conversation. But promotions, raises, like these elements that you brought up that, honestly, as a business owner, I mean, I'm a woman, I own a business, I'm running this business, I believe in these things, it's important to me. But when we really sat down and started talking about the check boxes, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I don't know. Like, do we do that? And it's not because I don't think we should. It's because I just haven't even thought to do the homework on my side to look at that data and to really analyze it and make sure that it's the way that it should be. So, I think if people could kind of get past this stigma of that bigger conversation that's happening, right? And no, this is like a data-driven certification. Let's talk real about what's going on in the business and just make some changes. Like, it's not that complicated.
It's not. No,
right?
And that's exactly it, where it's like it's seen as this inextricably messy gray area, this nebulous thing that just can't be solved. We can solve it the same way we address any other business critical issue. We have the data behind the causes, and they are just these cultural levers that can be adjusted. You fix it once and you're good forever. Or you can keep dumping money into trainings that we have, unfortunately, the proof now aren't working, and in a lot of cases are backfiring. And I think, like you said, it's like, you're a woman business owner. You obviously care about this on a personal level. And have seen that you can still have something to learn, where we want the message to get out there that you having a business in which everything isn't perfect in relation to equity doesn't mean that you're a jerk. You don't, right. This isn't a character assessment of anyone, that you fundamentally can morally be completely on board and still have unintentionally done things within your business that cause these unintuitive hidden barriers to equity in the workplace. And so that's what we want to focus on.
I think it's fantastic. So one last question, and I don't think I actually prepped you with this one, so we'll see how you respond. So if Sara Sanford were to save the world,
That's great.
what would that look like?
That's fantastic. Well, I'm hoping this is it.
There you go.
I mean, to me, what Jen is doing is the first step, I think, to saving the world. I think in a lot of ways, the way that we've approached equality and we've approached diversity is a little bit cart before the horse. And so I understand why intuitively people are doing trainings and having tough conversations. And it's not that those should stop. But what the data has demonstrated is that people become more comfortable with diversity after it happens to them. So it's not that we need to become comfortable with diversity and then invite everyone to the dance. It's just that people need to be there and stay there and truly have a sense of belonging. And then people over time actually become more okay with it. So in some ways, what we've created is really it's a market-led approach. Like I talk to people about what we work on and some people say, oh, isn't it that great and idealistic? You work on gender equality. And I laugh a little bit because I'm like, not really. We had to take this incentive-based approach, and granted, it's more of a carrot than a stick. It's more rewards-based, but it's not asking people to do the right thing because it's the right thing. It's asking people to do the right thing because it's good for them, because it'll help their bottom line, because we'll have more innovative businesses, because tech companies that have more women end up producing more tech patents every single year. They need to see it as a business imperative rather than a compliance requirement. So I think we're going to have to do this first in some ways, and then we can continue conversations about what underrepresented populations are still facing. I think those are conversations that we're always going to need to have. But I think we're actually going to be more receptive to them after diversity has happened to us. But I mean, when I think of like the end impact of what saving the world looks like, I want women to feel the same sense of freedom to define what success looks like for them and then to chase that in their own way. I think that's really what it looks like, instead of trying to define success in a way that we've seen represented as mainly male, instead of chasing it in a way that is traditionally masculine because it's the only example that we've had. That I want women to be able to chase it as themselves, and not by trying to be like as strong as men. That idea drives me nuts, or needing to empower women. The whole like female empowerment movement drives me insane. I think we just need to recognize those strengths as being as valuable as other ones that have already been recognized for a long time.
Sounds good to me.
I mean, yeah, and you guys are on board. You're doing it. I'm excited.
Me too. Well, thank you so much, Sara. Truly. I mean, not only for participating in this conversation, but and sharing your stories, personal and professional and all of the above, but
Thank you.
Just the work that you're doing also.
Thank you.
Much
Can I go back and
appreciated.
answer one previous question?
Yeah.
Sorry. So the one about advice to other girls.
Yes.
Mainly. So, and do this for the other woman in your life. You're really doing it for them, not for yourself, even though it doesn't sound like it. I hope young girls, young women who are coming up now will learn to say, I did this thing well and I'm proud of it. I'm still learning to say that. It's really difficult, but I'm getting in the habit of making sure that I say that in front of other women. Saying, yeah, I did this and I'm really proud of how I did. It's something that I don't hear women say enough, and I think it encourages other women to take risks. It sends the message that it is possible. Like you said, we're here doing it, and other women need to know about it, and it lets them brag about themselves. And that's fun.
We need more than that, more of that.
Yes.
For sure.
Yes.
Awesome. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.